Police would arrive at a residence where there was a report of human remains on fire. To get a better understanding of what was happening, police would talk to individuals at the residence. Melody Farris would explain to investigators that her husband, Gary Farris, had set the fire a week prior. Melody would explain to the police that it's possible that Gary could have died from a medical emergency and accidentally fallen into the fire due to some medical issues that he had. Investigators would consider this Gary's cause of death until they took a closer look. An autopsy done on Gary would show that Gary had a bullet lodged in his rib bones, which swiftly turned his case from an accident to a homicide. Melody and Gary had been married for 38 years and lived on a farm, a 10-acre farm, in Alpharetta, Georgia. The couple had been married for 38 years, but the investigators figured out that the last several years of their relationship had been rocky. Gary at one point would file for divorce, but would later dismiss it. The couple were living two separate lives. They were living on two separate floors of their home. They hadn't shared a room together in literal years. This posed a question to investigators. Were the couple having an affair? Were either one of them stepping out on their marriage? And Melody would state that at first that she wasn't, but she would soon later come clean to state that she was in fact having an affair, but this affair had ended a year prior to Gary's death. Investigators would also figure out that that was a lie when they looked at her phone records to show that Melody had been talking to her lover recently before Gary's death. Her lover would talk to investigators and tell them that the last time that he had spoken to Melody was the night before Gary's remains were discovered, and that was all the information investigators needed to make their case. Melody Farris was arrested for malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, concealing the death of another, and making a false statement. The jury was shown how the blood in the couple's home had traveled from the kitchen down the stairs to the lower level. The prosecution also pointed out how the state was trying to accuse Melody's own son, Scott Farris, of the murder of Gary simply because he discovered the gruesome remains of his father. Prosecutors stated that the only person with a motive and opportunity to murder Gary was Melody. Prosecutors explained that the couple fought about money, especially when Gary cut off Melody financially, but he financed their adult children. Investigators discovered that Melody was the beneficiary of Gary's $2 million insurance policy. The defense claims that there are too many unanswered questions in the case to convict Melody. The defense would state that Scott also had motive to kill Gary. He borrowed money from him as well. The defense also pointed out how the prosecution stated that there was a 38 caliber bullet that was found around Gary's remains and how Scott was the only person that had that type of weapon. The defense stated that from the beginning of the entire investigation that the prosecution had confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is our underlying tendency to notice, focus on, and give greater credence to evidence that fits our existing beliefs. The defense would state that Melody did not kill Gary. Scott Farris would take the stand to testify about the discovery of his father's remains. He would state, I walked up, looked, and I started seeing bones. Scott Farris would also talk about his mother's reaction to the discovery of Gary's body, stating that she only really got emotional once the police confirmed that the remains were human. He stated, I've seen my mother cry hundreds of times throughout my life, and it appeared to me to be fake. Scott knew that there were red flags in their relationship before Gary's passing, but denies having any involvement in the murder of his father nor the disposal of his remains. Melody's daughter, Emily, would take the stand to testify that her mother had had an affair before, and that was the reason why their parents' marriage actually started to crumble. She would state that her father wanted to reconcile, but their marriage really never recovered from the incident, and despite being taken off the joint account, Emily would state that her mother still held influence over the family's decisions and finances. A detective would testify to state that the couple got into an argument and Melody killed Gary because Gary controlled the money. He would state that investigators found ash and blood on Melody's clothing along with several burner phones in order for her to communicate with her lover. A forensics pathologist would testify to state that Gary's body was so badly burned that it was impossible to determine certain things such as height or weight, and that the only way that they were able to identify Gary was through dental records. The pathologist would state that Gary's cause of death was a bullet to the torso, though they could not determine which way the bullet went nor if Gary was alive or dead when he was hit due to the state of the body. In the defense's closing arguments, they would state that the prosecution provided little to no evidence that proved that Melody had any involvement in Gary's death. They would state that there was a doctor that even testified that explained that he could not determine whether Gary was alive or dead when the 38 caliber bullet hit him. The defense stated that the financial motivation that the prosecution is pushing, they never proved that Melody was even aware that Gary had an insurance policy, but it fit their confirmation bias. The defense stated that when they searched the Farris home, they did not extend their search to the apartment above the barn, which is where Scott lives, and they just disregarded it. The last point that the defense made was that the state gave no explanation for how Melody was able to lift, drag, and dispose of Gary's 6'4", nearly 300-pound body. Melody only weighed 120 pounds. Her lawyer would then attempt to demonstrate the difficulty by presenting several 40-pound bags of fertilizer in front of the courtroom. Melody's lawyer stated that I believe her, just like when I first met her, she's 100% innocent. In the state's closing argument, they stood by their claim that Melody's motive was the money, and under Gary's nearly $2 million insurance policy, Melody was granted the house and the property. They stated that Melody only wanted money and a life with her lover. The prosecution also stated that the reason why investigators never searched Scott's apartment was because there was no blood found in that area, so there was no need to. They stated that even if Scott was the killer, then there was no way Melody did not know about it because she must have heard or seen something since she was there at the time. The prosecution states that Scott was cooperative with the investigators. He corroborated evidence and he provided digital evidence of his whereabouts. The prosecution states that they cannot express enough Scott's innocence. The prosecution brought up the Farris family dynamic, and it was dysfunctional to say the least. After talking to the Farris children, the prosecution expressed that the words and phrases that they used to describe Melody were tore family apart, hostile, aggressive, demanding money. The prosecution stated that Melody's attempt to blame her own son for Gary's murder shows how cruel she really is. The only child to show any support to Melody was Amanda Bruce, who was their youngest, and she even said, "There was manipulation. I should have been more angry with her." And the prosecution's response to the defense's fertilizer demonstration was, "It was offensive to compare a man to a bag of dirt." Lastly, the prosecution would express Melody committed those crimes with a malice of forethought and an abandoned, malignant heart. She was great at betraying anyone close to her. The evidence in the law demands a guilty verdict. The jury would deliberate for 4 days before telling the judge that they were deadlocked. The judge would then order the jury to try one more time to come to an agreement. Melody Farris would be convicted of all 5 of her charges. As the verdict was read in court, Melody showed no emotion, but her children and other people in the courtroom did. They started crying as the verdict was read. Melody was actually out on bond prior to this, and she was immediately taken into custody after the verdict. Melody's sentencing date is scheduled for December of 2024. Under Georgia law, this conviction carries out a minimum sentence of life in prison. Goodbye, Earthlings. That is the end of today's video. If you liked today's video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, be safe, Earthlings. Peace out.